So I suspect numbers are a bit more than might be, but it'd been a nice day. But more than welcome. Hope you're sitting comfortably. Some uncomfortable things awaiting you presented here. I don't know, the whole question of this meeting, it starts with, what do you know about Freeport? Well, what do you know about Freeport? Because there's been very little, if any, information out in the public domain about Freeports, which are now going ahead. They're in our immediate neighbourhood, within the Highlands. There are two main Freeports within Highlands, and that's Inverness Harbour Freeport and Cromarty Mick and Invergordon Freeports within the Deepwater Port. So, look, could you maybe put up the slides of the four areas? Without any public consultation, as far as I can make out, these Freeports have been delineated and they're actually physically in existence. One, Inverness Harbour, includes, there's two areas to these ports. One is called a tax port, and the other one's called a customs port. Now, we split into different areas of the current Freeports. The Freeport in Inverness also extends to the part of the Longman industrial estate, and also Inverness Highlands University campus. The Freeports at Cromarty, Mick and Invergordon include all the deep water and extends into the cruise ship line at Landemere, Saltburn Pier, and also Invergordon Industrial Estate. Okay, so these, if you can see in this bit of paper, for example, I don't know if you can see it or not, they've all been marked off on the map in black, heavily black lines to delineate the outer boundaries of the actual Freeports themselves. Beyond that, I think, what is the red zone outer circle? The actual Freeport zones actually extend beyond that, out as far as Brora to the north, Beauly to the west, Nairn to the east, and just south of Inverness. Now, although they're not actually marked as being within the Freeport area at the moment, you can probably see from the slide that there is what they call the red zone. Now, that red zone has been allocated to allow businesses operating within the Freeport to extend out of the Freeport area and into the much larger, wider Freeport. Can't remember what they expand outer boundary, that's the one we're looking for. So over a period of 25 years, the effective control of the Freeports has come out of the public authority, and it's going to be run by corporate conglomerates. Now, Izzy's here as well today because she and Fife, as well as it being Highland Freeports, got this massive Freeport area called the Fourth Freeport. Now, that extends to Edinburgh Leith Dock, Edinburgh Airport, Grangemouth Refinery, other side of the water. It includes all the five ports up right up the coast. Correct me if I'm wrong, Izzy. Including Rosyth, Base, and Boston, that's right. So it's a big, huge area. And again, it's totally unconfirmed as to how's it going to run, who's actually in charge of these ports, who the port authorities are. So today, this is the point of the meeting today, is to ask a simple question of our politicians and the wider communities. What do you know about Freeports? Now, we've got first speaker, Professor Albeer, who is an acknowledged expert in this field, which is ports, all things ports. And we've got Odette Walker, who is from the Stirling Directive, and she's going to speak, follow up on Al. After that, over to you guys. We'll put out an open mic so you can speak, ask questions. But I have to say, we probably won't be able to answer these questions either, whether I can, possibly, but we don't know there's a lot of things involved with. In fact, I'll just run it through it now before we hand over Al, because this does have a big impact on it. Tucked away right at the end of the Highland Council document, there is what they call an appendix, package of incentives to be correct. Now, tax sites. Tax sites will receive land transactions within the tax site benefit land and building transaction tax. A new legislation will be applied for the first 10% rate of structures and buildings allowance in construction for 10 years, 100% enhanced capital allowances for the first year of investing in new plant machinery. Employers will pay zero national insurance contributions for the first 3 years. So if you're an employee there, you're not have national insurance paid. So come out in 3 4 so and try to apply for benefits or a pension, you're not going to get it. Right, 100% non-domestic relief for eligible businesses for 5 years. The customs sites, they are getting the relaxed duties, import duties will be suspended for goods coming in until goods leave the customs site. There will be duty inversion as described for goods entering the customs zone with higher tariff and final product. So in other words, they're getting whatever duty to be paid back. Customs duty exemption on imported goods. Import VAT and goods entering Freeport areas is suspended. Simplified import and export procedures, whatever that means. It doesn't expand on that, tell you what that actually means. So I suspect it means it's going to be a bit of a free for all. But I'm just surmising, which you probably shouldn't. Maybe Alf can clarify that one. Right, there's innovation. This is where there's going to be a Green Freeport Collaboration Hub, which gives a platform to create regional innovation hubs, which is what was talked about earlier with the red zone area. So expanding out in that wider area. And there's going to be new legislation to create enhanced sandboxes which will relax specific regulations to test innovative propositions. Tell me what that means, I don't know. Local authorities are encouraged to adopt fast-paced planning approaches, such as master plan consent areas, to provide greater planning certainty and enabling streamlined decision making. So there you have it. There's massive tax incentives within these areas. So you've got quite a strange situation where you've got one side of the fence that's been alleviated and paying zero or very little tax. Other side of the fence, you've got businesses trying to operate within the usual business manner, paying business rates, paying taxes on their employees, so on and so forth. So anyway, I can chat about all day with this because my background is within tax. I used to work for HMRC, so I know a thing or two about tax and how it works. So, but I don't know about reports. So at this stage, I will hand you over to our knowledge expert, Professor Alf Baird, who is on Zoom from Orkney today. So thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.
To freeports in general and then the UK freeport policy. So if we talk about port governance in Scotland and in Europe, and indeed globally, we might start with the point that there are actually 3 traditions. And one of these is the Hanseatic tradition, which is local and municipal ownership of ports. And this is what Scotland had up until the Union and well beyond the Union, in fact, was the ports were owned and operated, run by the boroughs themselves. And that was also, I think, very much related to the claim of right, the common good, and other aspects we're finding out now about our history. The second tradition is the Latin tradition, and that was, first of all, I would say that the Hanseatic tradition was mostly common in Northern Europe, the continent, Scotland, the continental countries, the Baltic, and so on. Local municipal ownership of ports. Then we have the what's called the Latin, or even the Jacobin tradition, which is the Southern European tradition France, Spain, Italy, and so on, where the ports are run and owned by the state. The state run them. And the third tradition is the Anglo-Saxon tradition, which is the English tradition of port operations ownership, which is private ownership largely, or corporatized ownership in the form of trust. So what Scotland has been subject to since after the Union, certainly from Victorian time, is the imposition of a different cultural approach to seaports, which took them away from common ownership, public ownership, and put them into the hands of, first of all, trusts, which were usually composed of trustees representing interests that exploited the port, if you like, stevedores, ship owners, and so on, merchants. So it took the ownership and operations of ports out of public hands. And since then, we've had privatisation of ports. So Forth Ports, for example, Clydeport, Tayport, are all privately owned now by offshore equity funds, whereas Cromarty and Inverness are still trusts, but not publicly owned entities. So their ownership is in a kind of limbo, as it were. We then get to free ports. Well, free ports globally have been around for a very long time. There are many free ports around the world. In fact, in Europe, there are 72 free ports in 20 countries. The issue with free ports is they tend to be located within ports, and their main function is to increase trade for that port. This is particularly the case in transshipment ports around the world: Malta Freeport, Freeport Bahamas, Freeport in Jebel Ali, Dubai, Jebel Ali Freeport, Jamta, or something it's called. So these free ports are well established: Suez Canal, Singapore, and that's in transshipment hubs where goods come in, they're stored, they're processed, they're relabeled, repackaged, and then re-exported. They're not typically for the domestic market. And this is to lever in multinational corporations to the port, to lock their traffic into the port. It's basically designed to grow port volumes. And that is also the case in ports in Europe, which have free port space or free trade zones within the port area. The UK free port policy, the UK did have free ports up until about, 10, 20 years ago. Free ports were in Tilbury docks. Even Prestwick Airport had a free port. And the idea was to grow trade locally through the node, through the terminal complex, as it were. But that free port initiative kind of, its legislative period expired, and it was not renewed. It was not deemed to be a success, strictly speaking. But the UK was not a transshipment platform for, say, Europe, or it tried to be, but it failed to be so, because it's not a competitive economy. It's not like Rotterdam Hub or Hamburg Hub, which have a focus on providing advanced transshipment facilities to serve multiple markets in Europe. So it's not the same thing. So there was a paper by Rishi Sunak when he was a backbencher about 2016 on free ports, and I think he had probably briefly or recently discovered the presence of or the existence of free ports around the world, maybe in the Indian subcontinent where there are quite a few, and the Middle East and so on. Free ports have been quite popular in growing trade for the ports that surround that they're concentrated within. And he's obviously thought this is a good idea. I think it's also a response to Brexit and the impact on UK trade from Brexit, which has been quite severe. Our competitiveness has been diminished even more, and something had to be done. And I think that's what the Tories' knee-jerk reaction was, to create some free ports. And mostly these are free ports in England. There are 8 free ports, I think, in England, one of which is an airport. And these are mainly, the biggest, the most important ones are around the ports on the Thames, the new DP World port at London Gateway, at Felixstowe and Harwich. The Felixstowe port is run by Hutchison Ports of Hong Kong, and there is Port of Liverpool, which is run by Peel Holdings, another offshore entity, which also owns Clydeport. So these are the major, and Southampton's the other one, Portsmouth. So these are the major free ports, and they're about developing trade for the ports, making the ports more attractive for trade to be located in and around. And certainly Thames and Felixstowe are largely geared to global trade and to bring in trade mainly from Asia, whereas ports in the south, like Southampton and Portsmouth, are perhaps more geared towards the continent. Interestingly, there's no free port for Dover, which is perhaps Britain's biggest trade port for continental traffic. So what we see in Scotland is a slightly different approach. The same benefits of free ports for taxation and customs duties and so on, but labelled green. And so basically it's the same legislation that governs what Freeport can do, but it has the word green in front of it, which we can deduce from that they want to be seen to be green, but it's no different from the Freeport policy and the legislation from Westminster elsewhere in the UK. And the benefits are really not that significant. If I'm looking at the benefits on the Thames, London Gateway are advertising Freeport logistics centres, where a unit of 120,000 square foot, which is quite significant, would have a benefit of about £2 million over a 5-year rental period. And the biggest unit, 1 million square feet, the biggest we might envisage, has a potential benefit of about £17 million over 5 years. And that would be for companies like Marks and Spencer and others, maybe the really big movers of logistic traffic. It's not a vast amount of saving. It's not going to create vast economic growth. It's quite marginal, really, in the overall scheme of things. Just on the point of green freeports in Scotland, the two that have been designated Forth and Cromarty Firth, these are largely seeming to be connected to offshore renewable wind developments, which is fair enough. But in my analysis of European ports that are much bigger or as big in renewable developments and also manufacturing, like the port of Esbjerg in Denmark, or the port of Eemshaven in Holland, or Stavanger in Norway, or the Baltic ports in Kiel, Lubeck, Gdansk, and further in. None of them have designated their ports free ports specifically for renewables. These renewables leases are happening anyway without free ports. They would have happened anyway without free ports. So tagging on the green free port status to this seems to be rather irrelevant in a sense. These offshore wind farms and production facilities were going ahead anyway. The bigger issue, I think, for us as Craig the Earl and others at Commonweal and other political parties like ALBA have shown is that these offshore wind leases were given away, basically, for under £1 billion and were worth at least a lease of maybe 20 billion. That's not including royalties. And this is where I think Scotland has missed out entirely on the real value of the resources. As we did with oil and gas, is we don't have a royalty on every barrel of oil or gas, cubic meter of gas, or every kilowatt hour of energy produced. We don't have a royalty on it. And bear in mind that the value of oil and gas at the moment, which is quite not the same volumes as we had, but it's still worth probably in excess of 20 billion a year. And we don't see really any benefit from that in the national coffers, as it were. And equally in renewables, we won't see any benefit from the perhaps value of 40 billion or more a year in energy sales of Scottish energy going mostly to the rest of the UK. 40 billion a year that could be every year. And these are the value of our trade that is intersect. And that's the nature of the colonial situation. So I don't see a great deal of benefit for these. The regimes that we have is imposed. The port arrangements, the privatised port arrangements on the Forth, the trust port arrangements elsewhere in Scotland are basically an imported arrangement. It doesn't fit the Hanseatic tradition. that Scotland was part of and used to, and public ownership of ports is common still internationally. That is the normal model. And also public regulation of ports rather than private regulation. Remember that these are port authorities. They are regulatory bodies, and they can prevent navigation, they can prevent competition. So they are, in a sense, anti-competitive monopolies. And that is why they have quite a significant value, is they have monopolies to protect. So I think probably the real issues here are to do with how we can get port investment. That's the other aspect about free ports. Free ports globally are linked to port investment in new ports or extended ports, advanced ports. We don't see any real significant port investment. We're just seeing the use of existing quaysides, existing infrastructure at Nig as well as, and mostly in Cromarty and also in the Forth, at Grangemouth, Leith, and the Fife ports or on Tayside. So we're not seeing any significant new investment, and I mean hundreds of millions of pounds, because new ports cost hundreds of millions of pounds. And Scotland has not seen a new strategic port, especially for continental connections, for a very long time, if we exclude the mistake in Aberdeen recently, which is a bit of an anomaly. And the other aspect here on port ownership and regulation is, or the lack of, is the value of renewable energy, which will bypass Scotland. And that really is the main thing. If we wanted to bring in multinationals to Scotland, and there's a great article in News for Scotland today by Neil Tye about GDP, and comparing Scotland's basically dead flat, rock bottom GDP with Ireland, Denmark, Norway, basically every small country in Europe has double, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the GDP of Scotland. And we have enormous trade potential, but it's constrained and it's extracted at low cost, subject to tremendous transfer pricing, if you like. And that includes not just oil and gas, renewables, but also things like whiskey and aggregates from Glen Sander and so on. So there's a whole range of issues that, in the trade sense, that Scotland needs to look at. It has no control over its trade, no control over its resources, no control over its potential wealth. Or its wealth. So there are issues there. And as I said, if you wanted to bring in multinationals, you do what Ireland and other countries have done in relation to corporation tax. It's possible to bring in multinational companies, of course, if you want to do that. That's done around the world. So there are a whole range of issues here, but it all comes back to the issues that Salvo are addressing, which is to do with sovereignty, which Scots must reclaim. Sovereignty over our territory, over our land, over our resources. The green free ports, the green aspect is just an add-on. It's fairly meaningless in the sense that it's still the same rather minimal UK taxation benefits given to any companies locating in the free trade zone. The key issue here is that the value of trade is not something that Scots are benefiting from, whatever it is. So that's why declaring sovereignty, independence, is absolutely fundamental. And green free ports won't help that challenge at all. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to take you back in history for a wee while before I bring you back to the present and the future. So, I'm a member of Salvo and one of the members of the Scotland Directive. So, we're going to look at 4 different times in our history. 1310, the Declaration of the Clergy and People. 1320, the Declaration of our Growth. 1663, the Act of Salvo. And then 1689, the Claim of Right. What all of them do they have in common? As Alf just said, it declares the people of Scotland are sovereign. We are the higher authority over anybody. The land in Scotland, we have authorisation what happens to that land and sea in Scotland. We need to claim it back, and we need to work together as people now for the rights and get free ports out of our out of our sight because, as Al just said, and as Graham said earlier on, it doesn't look as if it's going to cause us any benefit whatsoever. So, when you come to the sovereignty of people and our history, you've got to look at what I've just said as well, is common good land. Inverness has still got common good land, and you've got a common good fund. Now, the common good, can you hear it up the back?
Yep.
The common good land and common good fund is basically an old borough, what they used to call the old borough in Scotland. But it still exists today in Inverness, and businesses, the taxes that the businesses pay go towards the common good fund, and it benefits every single person within the Inverness community. So, for example, your New Year festival and the upkeep and upgrading of the city centre, etc. It's for the common good, and it still exists today. It's an old tradition, but it's still here, and we have to bring our old traditions back. But if the three ports are now going to be put in place in Inverness, and no taxes are going to be taken by the three ports or from the businesses that are within them, then your development and the common good is going to be depleted. And we already know that the councils, they say that their budgets are getting cut year in, year out. Well, how are three ports going to help you, the people of Inverness, and the local authority, and the local businesses, schools, community centres, libraries? How is that going to benefit you? So we need to make sure that we protect the common good land and the common good fund. You come on to the claim of right. The claim of right was the most progressive piece of legislation when it comes to human rights. And your Equality Act, it meant that everybody was equal. You got equal education no matter how poor or how rich you were. You got the same representation if you needed it legally. That again didn't matter if you were a pauper or a millionaire. Now, as somebody with a disability, and I've been a grassroots activist for many, many years, the Equality Act and your human rights is really, really important to me, and it should be really important to everybody here. We fought so hard to get the Equality Act, to get your protected characteristics, to get employment rights. Well, if we get free ports, then your employment rights, just forget about them. Because as Graham said, they're not even going to be paying your national insurance. You're going to have difficulty with your pensions, and if you do need benefits, you're not going to get them. And then you've got to think about your zero working hours. How many hours are you going to work? Where's your health and safety issues? Who do you go to claim insurance if there's a health and safety incident? Who picks up the bill for that? So there's all these things that we have to think about regarding free ports, and sadly, none of the politicians or councillors that we invited came here today to actually answer any of those questions that I've got, and hopefully some of you have got to here today. So I just want you to think about the initial impact it's going to have on the community of Inverness, and it's not just Inverness, as Alfie said, it's going to go further down into the cities of Scotland. It's not just about ports and airports, it can just be a building somewhere that's operating a business. So I want you to think about how this is going to impact you, your businesses, your local community, and how we are actually going to do anything as the people of Scotland, as the sovereign people of Scotland. What do we have to do to actually stop free ports?
Thank you very much, Colette and Alf. That was very interesting indeed. I think, I'm not quite sure if you can hear me, Alf, but somebody with one of the wireless mics can maybe let you know what's happening. We're going to have a quick question and answer session from the audience. Again, as I said at the start, you're going to be answering these questions at this stage with the lack of knowledge that we have. It's debatable, but you can ask the question and you record them and take them forward with those who may not answer some of the questions, such as elected politicians and councillors. I think that's the appropriate place to start getting some answers, because these folk were elected by us and should be held to account by us. So, anyway, over to you. And Stuart there has a roving mic, and if you want to ask a question, put up your hand and we'll get the questions going. So if you can identify your name as well when you're asking the question.
Yes, my name is Tor Justad. I live in Scotland, so halfway between Inverness and the new so-called Freeport. I'm involved in an organisation called Highlands Against Nuclear Power, opposed to all nuclear developments in the Highlands and anywhere for that matter, but particularly in the Highlands. And in the initial reports about the Freeport, one of the new directors talked about using the Freeport to build SMRs. For those of you not familiar with nuclear jargon, these are small modular reactors. This is the Tory dream of new nuclear, which has never been successfully done in any other country in the world. And so it's a dream project, another Tory dream project. But we are concerned as an organisation that nuclear should again rear its ugly face in the Highlands, given that Scotland is now declared as a nuclear-free country, even though we've got Trident, of course, on our doorsteps. But in terms of nuclear power, the last nuclear power station will close at Torness in 2028. So hopefully that will be the end of nuclear in Scotland. So our concern is about this new development, and most people, I don't think there are many here, possibly today, who are actually aware of this proposal, which I think needs to be opposed very strongly.
And then you take that question up, or leave it open? It's actually a very good point, so thank you very much for that. And there's a lot of questions that we've been answered. That's another one to answer. So, anybody else got a question?
Yes, I've got a question. My name's Ian Cameron. I'm retired, thinking of emigrating. I was involved in Freeport way back in the 70s and 80s. It was called Oceanic Project then, that's last century. And basically what it was about was getting goods from the other side of the pond into the deep ports of Stanton and the Port Glasgow, transferring them across the country into the deep ports at the east side of Scotland, up to Invergordon, etc. They even spent millions and millions of pounds on the infrastructure. I was involved in the computing logistics of it, and spent millions of pounds on the infrastructure and raising bridges across the canals, because they were going to use the canals as well as transport. But the port authorities down in the east of the country, especially in Immingham and Harwich, were really, really strong. They had a huge lobby, and they were very, very against the fact that it would give the Scots a lot of power in Europe. And of course, with Brexit happening, it would have been so beneficial to Scotland for that. It would have saved all these large transporters going around the English Channel or over the top of Penn and Perth, and the infrastructure and the jobs in Scotland would have been absolutely fantastic. What concerns me about this Freeport is different. What it looks like is they're having a grab at the assets of Scotland. Because once they get a hold of it in independent hands, once they get a hold of that land, they have that area around Ardesir, Inverness, and they call it a Cromarty, but if they take over Cromarty, they've Invergordon, the whole deep water ports there. And I know what the ports can do. They have a huge control over their ports, and no independent people will be able to move in. Okay, there's the other issues over wages and national insurance and things like that. But I am dead against private organisations grabbing big hunks of Scotland and hanging on to them. Because once they've got them for ad infinitum, there's no way we can do it. What can we do to stop that? We can talk about it all we want, we can join hands across Scotland, but we need to do something legally to stop these things happening.
Well, sorry, if I can pick up on that last point here, I think this is the first of many meetings to be conducted across Scotland. I think there's further meetings in the fourth report here, and we're basically feeling our way through this. We don't know what's happening. But basically, I think at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to do is have a look at the legal situation, because basically these corporate bodies have got these free ports at the moment for 25 years. So, without any consent from us, we've just been handed this area of land to do basically what they like within these designated areas. Now, as a port person, you probably know a lot more about these, but certainly the tax aspect is worrying, because that's you're talking major money, not into the economy, and business rates and stuff like that alone. Over a period of 25 years, how much are we going to lose in terms of money that should have been properly ours? So, yeah, there's much to think about with this. Sorry, Colette. Who's got their hand up, sorry? Neil, yes. Sorry, Myra. Thank you.
My name is Neil Tye from Rosemarkie. My name is Neil Tye from Rosemarkie. Thank you for that speech, Alf, and everybody else. My main question concerns the overall control of this project, I call it. Who is going to be in charge of it? Is it going to be through the again government in Westminster, or is it controlled from Highlands and Highlands Council or the Scottish government itself? And secondly, if it is going to go ahead, what's the time frame that we're talking about when this will be instigated?
Hi, so there's 12 partners on the board of this collaborative report. Each partner has one vote. So you can imagine Inverness Council, or Harbour Council has one vote. So are we going to ready when we get anything passed and ready to I don't know about what's that, but I
Alf, do you want to add anything to what?
Yes, if possible, Colette. I wasn't too sure if you could hear me. On that, first of all, the point about the Oceanic project, which I was familiar with, having studied it some years ago, about using Scotland as a land bridge for European traffic, and using the West Coast ports, the natural deep water of Scotland. This is another aspect we don't often think about, is Scotland has the deepest natural water harbours in much of Western Europe, and this was a big virtue. And I've studied two port projects, one for Orkney on the Scapa Flow project as a European transshipment terminal, and also Hudderston Port as a deep water container transshipment terminal for European transshipment as well. Now, these research projects were done, and I was advisor to both Clyde-Port and Scapa Flow and the Orkney Islands Council Marine Harbours Department. And we did these studies with European support. The project at Hudderston recommended a container terminal be developed, but then Clyde-Port was acquired by Peel Ports who own Liverpool, and UK policy pushed Liverpool to develop their shallow river as a major container terminal. And this had quite a large amount of funding from George Osborne's treasury for dredging the River Mersey to quite considerable depths, so that the largest container ships could go into the Mersey. But Hunterston already had the deep water and should have been an easy shoe-in for that kind of project. The other project, Scapa Flow Container Terminal, was the same thing. The Council Harbours Department wanted to do it. There was a tenant ready to go in and develop the former naval base at Lyonnais into a container terminal relatively modest in size, but 1 million containers, which would have doubled Scotland's trade by value, just by intercepting the container ships doing the transatlantic route via the Great Circle route, and coming in via the North Channel rather than Dover Strait, as a lot of the container ships already do. And this was ideal for container transshipment for the Baltic, Scandinavia, Iceland, Norway, Russia, as well as Scotland, Ireland, Iberia even. And we had an interest from a terminal operator that was willing to take a lease. Anyway, the council, the Scottish Government refused to support that. The policy of the UK was to push container terminal developments to the south of England. And this is where Scotland is always going to lose out. Always these major port projects get pushed to the south of England. Airports as well. So Prestwick could have had a big role, especially in air cargo, like Anchorage does in Alaska. So all these transshipment hub developments based on distance savings, environmental savings, natural locational advantages, deep water, all these things Scotland has in abundance, but because we don't have control over our transport policy, then they don't go ahead. On the question, what can we do? Of course, the only option is independence. And then once you reclaim your sovereignty, you can develop your economy. As anyone who's read my material on colonialism knows that a colonial territory is always underdeveloped. And that goes back to Neil's article today about GDP, and we see that. On the question of nuclear aspects, we should be careful because one of the free ports in England is very much connected to the nuclear industry, and that's, I think, Freeport East, Harwich, Felixstowe, and so on, and linked also to the Sizewell nuclear plant and development, and also that's related to the future idea about creating hydrogen fuel. So nuclear energy is connected to these free ports, certainly in England, and nothing to stop them also being involved in the Scottish ones. The other thing about the free port, I think, on the fourth, related to Grangemouth, is interest also there in fracking and other aspects, which again, once you take these things out of public control and public regulation, then it's anything's possible. On the question of control, really, and that's Neil's point, all of this legislation, free ports, everything else, port policy, really, in terms of transport policy in the UK, is largely related to Acts of Parliament in Westminster. So it's Westminster legislation. And that includes trust port creation, port privatisation, port regulation, free ports. All of this legislation is reserved. So there's absolutely nothing really Scotland can do about it. And all the Scottish Government did with free ports is relabel it green ports to make it more palatable to maybe their green friends in the alliance. But it's meaningless other than that, because it's just the same UK legislation. And it's the same vested interests in each free port area that will exploit the values, the rents, the advantages. And as Colette says, no real advantage will accrue to local communities from this. And that's really the downside. So lack of control, it all comes back to the same thing. What independence is about, reclaiming sovereignty, the ability of Scotland to actually do its own thing in line with its own values, culture. And cultural values are the big thing here. We are having imposed on us values that are, to use a term, alien on Scots. And that includes port organisation, port management, free ports, trade exploitation, lack of common good awareness. All these aspects are just are not Scottish. Thank you.
Lastly, I'll clarify that it's free ports are a reserved matter. It's something that a lot of people have been saying that here given this information that the Scottish Parliament are doing this. It's UK reserved matter. Whether you are an independent supporter or not, this is about Scotland, the country that you're living in as well. It's about your local businesses, your local community. It's about the generations that are coming up next that you should be really worried about how this is going to impact them. Yes, we can say as people that are independent supporters that this is another way of showing that Scotland is too small, too poor, etc. And it's getting done very quietly under the radar, and that's why we're here today to basically start bringing these questions and these points that we want answered. And sadly, the people that are representing you, and they do represent you, they're your elected representatives, whether they're in the Scottish Parliament or they're in the Westminster Parliament. They are your representatives that people voted for in your constituency, and they haven't came here today to answer any questions, which is quite sad that they haven't been here today to answer those questions. But for today, I think really, if they're not here to answer your questions today, I think each and every one of you, that especially the ones that are here from Inverness and the local surrounding area, you have to then write to your local councillor, your local MSP, your local MP, and ask the questions and see if they reply to you. Get the questions answered. Organise meetings with them. Organise community councils. Because we as people of Scotland, as I said earlier on, and so did Al, we are still sovereign. It isn't the claim of right. The claim of right still exists. I know people like to think it doesn't. It got ripped up when the treaty was, it's actually part of the treaty. So it still exists. So when we talk about the union, if the union still seemingly exists, so does the claim of right, more so. We are sovereign. So let us, the people of Scotland, now start to open our mouths and let our voices be heard in this.
Thank you, Colette. That was very good. And while others have things from Salvo's perspective, of which I'm the chair of Inverness, this is one of our major projects moving forward. I've said this is the first of a series of meetings across Scotland, and we'll develop the thing as it moves and add knowledge along the way. Because the whole thing is as transparent as mud. Don't know what's going on in the background. Deals seem to have been sealed without any public knowledge virtually. Recently I've been speaking to people within the local business communities, with one exception. Everybody asked the same question: what's a free port? Never heard of it. And said, well, you've got one right in your doorstep. So I think it is an important project. Salvo will be taking it forward as a major project. There's a whole element of our website, salvo.scot, devoted to free ports. There's a wealth of information in there, so I suggest you have a look at that, such as we know at this stage. And we'll be adding detail to it as we progress and learn more. But I think Colette made a very good point. Our representatives are elected by us, so they should represent us. And the people don't seem to have done that. The whole thing's been snuck in there. And again, Zalf made the point this is a reserve matter, and money, funding's coming from the UK government via the levelling up funds. So Michael Gove was pushing the point and obviously driving this forward. There's other areas of Scotland which are going to be not free ports as such, but, and I'm not calling them as such, but they're going to be effectively creating charter cities in Aberdeen, Dundee, Glasgow, including the whole area of Strathclyde Regional Council area. And again, how that's going to pan out, I don't know. But everything's been snuck in there without democratic input. So, Neil, do you want to speak again? Thank you very much.
Hi. The question basically is concerns the general public within the area. Are they going to be able to, the new ownership, the corporate bodies who are going to run these organisations, are they in any way going to infiltrate their powers within the Freeport over the local communities and local people?
Again, like everything else, Neil, this is completely as transparent as mud. These are the questions we are starting to ask, and I think this is the first time we've had a meeting in Scotland about Freeports. So, like I say, this is a learning process for us. We're trying to uncover what's been happening, and all we can do is inform the public. Quite how we progress this, not sure at this moment, but it's good to see contributions from you guys out, because I presume from your reaction you weren't aware of the Freeport situation. Either to any great extent. Sorry, Tori, you want to speak again?
Yeah, sorry, just a comment on Baird's last contribution, which was great, but he didn't get to the next stage of what we actually do to try and change the situation, which I'd like to hear his views about. But also just to mention, I came across this, I think, in the Ross Journal quite recently, that the Port of Cromarty Firth is holding their AGM in the Ross County Football Stadium on the 28th of September. It's a Thursday night at 6 o'clock, and anybody can sign up to it. So it's just a suggestion. Maybe I'm certainly going to go along and ask questions about the nuclear issue, but obviously it's an opportunity for other people to go to that meeting and ask some searching questions.
I don't know if you've heard about the Scottish Liberation Movement. We're growing quite fast. Work on sites now. We're one of the same with a more active thing that, and it's the Liberation Movement that brings the we need to get legal action. I don't know how that's going to happen. I mean, we need to crowdfund, I suppose, for that. Get legal advice and legal action to stop these Freeports from really being forced. Because they're not Scottish, they're not ours, they're not what we want, they're not going to benefit Scotland as a whole. They're not going to be beneficial for employees or any of the communities they're in. And we have to stop. This is the first two opening up more. But legal action is your well, it takes money, so we have to crowdfund for that too. I can't see any other way we go to court to stop this. Because it's against this. Yeah, it goes against Scots law. It's unequal. It's making a very big difference between people in the Freeport and people outside, and it's not acceptable. It's not different for us. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. But I think legal action might be the only answer to how we deal with this.
I can hear you, Colette. I couldn't hear other members of the panel, unfortunately. But yeah, just on that one point, I think I did cover what to do. There is only one thing people in Scotland can do, and that is to get independence, because that's the only way you can change UK legislation, whether it's to do with corporatising or privatising ports, or selling off leases for energy as well. I think that's heavily influenced also by UK energy policy and Freeport legislation. So there's not really much that Scots can do other than that. The historical papers that I've seen written about trusts, which is rather a bit of an English invention, I think, is by French economists who considered the English trust model, and certainly in relation to trust ports, and concluded it was not politically acceptable in Latin or Jacobean or Hanseatic tradition, largely because it allowed for interception of economics rents by vested interests, by trustees, acting in their own interest and that sort of thing. And it takes it away from fundamentally the public good aspect, the common good, or the common good as part of the claim of right. So this claim of right that Colette mentions is actually a fundamental part of the Constitution of Scotland. It's also part of our culture, our tradition, our heritage, as well as our law, and it's all been violated. So the only way to I think, remedy all of these issues is really through independence, which is national liberation, and even according to the UN, is decolonization. So we are in that situation where our resources are plundered in any way possible, shape or form, by the legislation of the entity that controls the territory, and that is Westminster. So that's the fundamental problem, and the only way to overcome it is, unfortunately, you could attend an AGM for Property First Port Authority, but I'm not so confident you would make much of a difference to anything that's being done in terms of UK legislation. So that's the fundamental problem we have to address. The only solution to it is independence.
I just say again what, as he said about going to taking legal action, but for those that don't know about the Stirling Directive was launched on the 22nd of July. It's going to be directing the Scottish Government to actually basically own up and say that the terms of the treaty have been overstepped by Westminster, and we're basically annexed by Westminster. We were supposed to be two nations, the United Kingdom of England and the United Kingdom of Scotland. So it's two kingdoms, not just one kingdom. And the treaty has been overstepped 1,000-fold. And we are going to instruct the Scottish Government that they have to acknowledge that the terms have been overstepped. The treaty is null and void. So any statutes like any bill that's went through that affects Scotland just does not exist. They've got to the 22nd. We're going to be giving it to the Scottish Government on the 19th of September. We will hear more of that. But if the Scottish Government won't do as we are directing them to do, then on the 22nd of December, which we're instructing them, then we will say to them that we will then take them to the European Court of Human Rights, because it is our human right, as the sovereign people of Scotland, to still be able to live and work by our constitution that is legally still bound in the treaty, in terms of the treaty of this union. So if you don't abide by the constitution, then it's null and void. So again, there's a couple of options here. So there's the European Courts of Human Rights, there's the International Court of the UN, and obviously then leading up to us being independent. So what I would say is, again, we are the people. We need to speak up. So if you haven't already, sign up to SALCO, who is the campaigning and the education side, and Liberation Scot is the more legal side. But we need people to get involved so that we can take this further. Because if our politicians can't even come to the event today, well, we really need to take it into our own hands. So we've got a couple of options, but it does infer going to court, unfortunately, which does cost money. But overall, we do need independence.
Colette, do you want to contribute?
I've given a lot of interesting reports already. When the local one was first announced, Okay, closer.
Yeah.
When the local one was first announced, the Inverness Courier trumpeted that there would be 25,000 new jobs. Well, I take those estimates with a huge pinch of salt, and I usually divide by 10, and even then, I'm usually too high. All the evidence is that free ports don't create new jobs. They shift jobs from existing places into the free port, and the people who get those jobs, as we've already heard, will be on less favourable terms than they used to be. But you only need to mention jobs, and politicians and the local newspaper go berserk. I tried twice writing to the Courier. Neither letter was printed, trying to give a more balanced version of what free ports actually mean. I'm astonished that local councillors open arms for this free port development, because they're the ones, and then indirectly ourselves, who are going to suffer most. The free port won't be paying business rates. That will put a bigger burden on the Highland Council rates system. They also find that they won't get any kind of control. It's already been pointed out that I have one representative on the board of this outfit. No use whatsoever. They also have to pick up the tab for the lack of controls that will exist, because one of the things that makes the whole thing called green and nonsense is that the regulation of people in the free port won't be able to control pollution. But the local council will have to pick up the bill for clearing up the mess. And so it's very sad that there are no MPs or MSPs here today to listen to this. I don't know if there are any councillors, but I think that's something that we can do, to contact councillors, MSPs, even try the Courier. They might just pay attention. But at a local level, these are things that we can do. One thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is the connection between free ports and international crime. Free ports, according to the OECD, are involved in the trafficking of particularly stolen art treasures. The lack of controls over them also undermines our whole law enforcement and therefore our democracy. And these points just get glossed over. 25,000 new jobs, forget it. Let's go ahead. And we really must make people more aware of all these downsides of free ports. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I do believe within the packages of incentives, the customs sites are given simplified import and export procedures. So, I think that's covering what you were saying, Andrew. Simplified import and export controls. There's other things which crop up. There's so many questions here. I mean, something fundamental like if there's a fire breaks out, who goes into the free port area? Who's built for it? It's us, the council taxpayers, that are going to be paid for stuff like that. They get the benefits of zero business rates. So many little things like that. It all counts. I think you're spot on right, Andrew, with the employment regulations. Well, again, we can try to find out what these are, and we think about law every time. And I think you're absolutely right. Folks that are actually employed at the moment will be given new contracts if they even get a contract, re-employed, but with favourable conditions, minus national insurance and all the rest of it. So this is just the start of the process, and we've got literally thousands of questions to be asked. I do think the starting point is with the local politicians, wherever they may be with us in Ireland or what area, we need to ask them serious, heavy duty questions. Why is this going ahead? On whose authority did you let this go ahead? Because there seems to be a joint project between Michael Gove and his Levelling Up department and the Scottish Government, with Kate Forbes in their thereabouts, and the local authority. So, authorities rather, but without any control, and they're punting millions of pounds. I think it was called incentives. £25 million in seed capital will be allocated to improve accelerated development and provide infrastructure. So, they're putting money in it for whose benefit? I mean, well, exactly whose money is going in there, and who benefits? Who is free? Free ports. Mr. Llewellyn.
Hi. One thing I'd like to point out, I used to live in Antwerp, and I worked for a company called Ineos. Ineos have got a factory that's almost 6 kilometres long, and it actually straddles the boundary between Belgium and Holland. And some goods come in one gate and they go out the other because of the tax system. Now, at the end of the day, Ineos are really well known for one thing: ethylene cracking. Basically, at the end of the day, you've got a 12 metre tower with catalyst in it that makes ethylene. It's very, very high temperature, and guess what? You get flare-offs. Well, every single person that lives in Cowdenbeath knows what a flare-off does, because at the end of the day, most morning is a joke with these flare-offs. They go to this. I don't believe it's Ineos that actually run that, but the thing, as far as they've got an ethylene cracker in Grangemouth. Now, if Ineos in Belgium have a flare-off, they get charged €20,000 a minute that light goes on. That's what they get charged. Basically, and most morning, it's like it never gets dark in Cowdenbeath. It's like permanent daylight, because and the locals here are absolutely raging about it. And that's where the present things that we've got at the minute. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about Ineos, there are all sorts of things. There's got guess who owns the pipeline that comes in for the North Sea? Jim Ratcliffe, Ineos. It's going to come in there. It can come into the Murray. It can be processed, fired down to Grangemouth, and from there on, and then sent off down south. And at the end of the day, what do we get for it? Basically, Ratcliffe had threatened to close Grangemouth once before. How would it be better if we let him do it?
Well, firstly, interestingly, I'm still away from the comment report. Even bigger problem with the fourth report area that we've got Inverness, who operate the Grangemouth refinery, and Inverness in Scotland have fracking licences which they cannot use at the moment because of the moratorium from the Scottish Government. But what happens when the Freeport encompasses Grangemouth and the whole fourth estuary, and they've got fracking licences? Who's in charge of these licences now? Inverness can't currently use. Again, it's another question to be asked. It's like Pandora's box. It's huge amount of information that's missing. So we just take it from here. And I think, again, I'll just reiterate what Colette said. If we can get an immediate email campaign or whatever out to your MPs and councillors straight away, we can certainly take it forward with, for example, press campaign. I put out a press release in every newspaper in the area, including Orkney and Shetland Islands and Western Islands, and I invited the STB and Henry Farr and some of the other people along. And as you can see today, along with the elected representatives, no immediate interest, despite it being one of the biggest projects absolutely on the doorstep, and just brushed under the carpet. It's ridiculous. So I fully appreciate what you're saying, Andrew. I don't expect there to be any further movement with the press. They don't want people to know. Basically, they don't want people to know the true extent. Sorry, yes,
Thank you. Sorry I missed the start of the talk. I wish I could have heard but I'm pretty horrified by the whole thing, and I've just like a kind of worms I'm starting to look at myself just now, and I'd be more than happy to write to any local representative I can for answers about this, but it'd be really helpful for me if the really knowledgeable ones about this who have done a lot of the work could prepare a set of really probing, really focused questions that I could be sending to ask, so I'm not kind of like babbling about stuff I don't really understand. Every one of us that was interested in sending those emails had that set of questions that really begged a serious answer. That would really, I think it would open the eyes of the people receiving that list of questions if they couldn't answer them themselves, so I think that would really help focus the matter. Thank you.
That's an excellent idea. I'm going to take that. Jan, I was just going to say that it would be possible that the group that organised this event, the three-course group that came together to actually work on the research and start putting up on all these different public meetings, and as I say, this is the first of many. I think it would be a good idea that we work together and got a whole load of questions. And on the Salvo website, there is a designated reports page. So I think what we should be doing in the onset of this is actually work on the questions, put them up on the website page to give people the information that they can, and we could actually then just even draft an actual email that you can send to your local representatives. I'm not even going to say politicians at the present moment because they really aren't acting like them. They are there to represent you. So I think really, we really need to be singing from the same song sheet. So it would be really good if we just had a couple of drafted emails that we can send out and get a list, and we'll put them, I think we should put them up on the Salvo and the Freeport website if that's okay with everybody else. If you want to maybe get yourself familiar with the Salvo website, of course, it's got more information there as well.
Just some add what Colette said, and I know from experience that emails have to be personalised. So whatever the questions are, you can personalise it at the beginning because we just get rid of it again. So whatever it is, it's certainly personalised before you go into the group email. Put in what affects you and what your question is, and then add the rest, because the rest are all relevant. But we talk to each other, and if they all get the same email, just going to bring them with a reply. Sad as it is, that's what's going to happen. Please.
Sorry, this lady here. Sorry, what's your name, John?
Jo.
Is your mic on?
Jo Mullen.
Jo, okay. Right.
I think I'm from Elgin Murray, and I'm try not to speak too much or scare people too much, but I have one technical question about my own investigation that I've been doing over the past few years. Does anybody in the room know whether deep geothermal energy, sourcing energy from deep under the ground, they just started it in Cornwall, the Eden project, which is part of the Duchy of Cornwall land. A study was done into that potential for Scotland by when Fergus Ewing was the energy minister, and that will be one reason I think why he's maybe not here. I need an answer to a question. Is at a deep geothermal energy, that's way under the ground. It's sourcing from water and the hot water, and then recycle, bring it back up to use energy. There's also a shallower type of rock that they're talking about doing that with. And this study was published by the Scottish Government in 2013, my question is, does anyone know if this type of trying to source energy from there, from the deep rocks, is that, what could it be called, fracking on steroids? I just need to know, is that a kind of fracking?
Technically, we don't have an answer to that, I don't think. Something that we need to take away.
Alf, do you know anything about the geothermal?
I'm afraid it's not my area. I told Colette I can't really comment on that. I just wanted to, if I could, mention something about the employment impacts that Andrew Fraser raised. And just to say that, yeah, the 25,000 job estimate looks a bit ambitious. But having said that, port economic impacts, of which I've been involved in quite a number of studies around the world, ports are economic engines for an economy, usually. But these tend to be ports that that have quite a diverse range of traffic, cargo, and serving the wider economy, especially container traffic and ferry traffic. And this is not something that's evident in Inverness or Colette. It's different traffic, bulk traffic, small consignments of bulk traffic in Inverness, and in Colette it traditionally was oil related, but is mostly focused on renewables now. So these have different economic impacts, which probably haven't really been estimated. I would say the council admitted that they have a lot of uncertainty about anything to do with free ports in their policy paper. They don't really know much about it, and it will be organised as a free port company, which the council, I think, are supposed to have perhaps one seat on a 12-person board. So they'll have an insignificant role in decision making and possibly more administrative. So what you have here is the borough, as it were, the council, is more a bystander to what's going on, like the rest of us, are really bystanders to this and lacking in control or accountability or responsibility to what might happen. So even going back to the last point about fracking, who knows? This company will be a commercially driven operation, the Freeport company. It will be looking to maximize revenue from different sources. It will not have very much to invest in new infrastructure. I think the grant is something under £20 million from the UK government, if that. It's not a lot of money. There will be some administrative support, but essentially it will be tasked to make its own commercial future, if you like, and who knows what its motivation will be, but one assumes its motivation would largely be commercial.
Thing I read in the last few days, maybe of consideration. INEOS is in the process of moving its headquarters to Monaco for tax reasons.
That doesn't surprise me something. Stuart, I've got a question from Annie. Hello, Annie.
I just wanted to follow up from your suggestion from the back about questioning our elected reps. And we absolutely do need to be right in the faces with this. But following on from what Izzy says, we don't know who answers the emails when we send them to them. most of the time it's not them. And I think you guys know that because you didn't get an answer from Fergus Ewing. So I wondered if we might be able to sort of organise ourselves into little groups of 2 or 3 and go to the surgeries and give them a list of questions and just get right in their faces.
Good night.
Thank you, Ian Cameron again. 2 things. One of the lady said about fracking. The extraction of energy from geothermal sources is an excellent idea. In simplification is you pump water down to about 13 or 14 kilometres under the ground where the temperature is extremely high and it comes pumped back up hot and you use that energy for various reasons. They do it in Iceland. However, to do it in Scotland, it wouldn't be water you'd be pumping down, it would be, this is from my Canadian contacts, it's heavy water type of chemical that goes down, which ends up on your water table, so that's it. So hopefully that helps, it's just another type of fracking. In response to Colette, I agree with everything you're saying, but I think we're being very naive about how we're approaching this lady, sorry, Anna's. A great idea when you actually need to get in touch with these representatives, our representatives. I've got a drawer full of letters from Westminster in response to various things. In fact, you received some just recently. They just don't pay any attention to us. And to approach the media in terms of the newspapers, we're just wasting our time. The only thing we can do is set up our own media system and get it out there to everybody and say, it's not just the past few months that Scotland's been under conservative colonial rule, it's been for over 300 years. And we can shout and we can have as many meetings, we can hold as many hands together as long as we want. We've got to do something. It's not what we need to do, we have to do something about it. And we need to get out there for the media. I've got loads and loads of contacts that are the same mind as me, they're so frustrated about what's happening or what's not happening, that we're really worried that we don't have a government in Scotland. Thank you.
I'm with these two. I think the pressure we need to put on these MPs is we're miles away. The fact that none of them are here, we need to now go to them. So, me personally, I would like to get a list of the 5 most important questions, get a signatory for everybody that wants to ask it, and I will personally go to Kate Forbes' office and say, I'm not waiting until I get an answer. Then the next, if we bring all the answers to the next meeting, then we can then discuss them ourselves, and if she's not here, she can't defend herself. So again, she's going to be attacked with another pile of questions the next time I go. So if these meetings are continuous, then she will suffer continuous pressure. And if we can get more than just me, then that'll be even better. Because I kind of see what this Freeport's actually for. If there's no big ferries coming in with cargo, and there's no big ferries going out with cargo, what's it for? It actually looks more like what this gentleman suggested, which is to allow them to pump our oil tax-free from the north to the south with no interference at all. So where is that getting asked? That's the first time I've heard that. I mean, I'm from Cowdenbeath. Can I just add that? I am used to those sleepless nights when the flare happened. And I had no idea, I'm 40 years old now, I had no idea that any of us get charged 20k a minute. Where was the 5 times with this for the last 40 years? Why can't we break into the news? I think the only way to do this is to put extreme pressure on so they can't do anything but answer our questions.
Yeah. Oh yeah, John.
I've seen the start of an action group here, and I think you need to organise yourselves and get contact details from each other and get yourselves organised and allocate jobs. Who's going to phone who? Who's going to write to who? Who's going to contact the newspapers? Get yourselves organised. Be the local action group.
What's the name of the
Well, Aye, but you want to get other people involved as well, not just Salvo members, but people out with Salvo too.
Yeah, you've got loads of contacts.
You've got
loads of contacts, all interested. All we need is their signature on a bit of paper, and that's being joined to be good.
Yeah, well, if we answer the thing with Salvo, yeah, we are engaged. We have a dedicated team, which Colette was referring to earlier, which we're all members. We've got the research capabilities, and we're using them, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But I think from what Jan said, it's quite evident that with Salvo resources, we don't have the capability to cover what's needed to be covered across the whole of Scotland. For example, within the Highlands and Islands grouping, our area covers from the border with Argyllshire right the way up to the Shetland Isles and the Western Isles. Within that, we've got 500 plus members, most of whom are not active as in any shape or form, but they are part of Salvo. It's harnessing people, but I mean, this is not just about Salvo. This is about the wider impact on the people of Scotland. And regardless of your politics, we're non-political. Salvo's non-political. The Liberation Movement is non-political. It is driven by people. Any political group can join this campaign. So, it's not all about Salvo, it's about getting people harnessed, as Jan was saying, into working cooperatively to take this forward with our representatives. I was going to call politicians, but Colette's right, they're not. They're not even representatives because they're not here today. So, gravy truckers, I think. So, right, I'm conscious of the time. It's 2:30 now. Does anybody else want to ask any questions? No? Yeah, well, can I put it through you, Jan?
Yes, me, it's easy to get to me, jan@salvo.scot. Very easy, straight away. jan@salvo.scot.
Again, if you haven't already joined Salvo, anybody that wants to can just go on the salvo.scot site and sign up. It's a 2-minute process. I think we're going to be having a meeting Highland Mines sometime next week, possibly. So now we've got today, we've had our first meeting, we can take this a stage further and do some seriously heavy-duty research into what's happening. And as you quite rightly said, put immense pressure on the likes of Kate Forbes, Baird, Ian Blackford, Drew Henry, and all the councillors in the Highland Council. So, I think it's probably a good idea to have a little 5-point thing on the Salvo website. If you, as Jan was saying, if you want to form little groups with each constituency, I'm quite happy to liaise with anybody who wants to set up. I'm looking at you, Gordon. I'm quite happy to speak to you and really talk through something. So, just a bit of feedback from today. What do you think? Do you feel as though you've learned anything about Freeport today, or how do you think? What are you thinking? I'm sorry, Colette, can you invite up?
Much of the conversation from the stage, unfortunately, Colette, but if you wouldn't mind, just to say a couple of points, that it's worth remembering here that the Freeports are a Tory policy being implemented by the Scottish Government. They don't have to implement it, I don't believe. They needn't support it, but they are supporting it, as is the Highland Council and other councils. So that's worth remembering. But if we go back to previous discussions about what the Scottish Government really is, it really is just a spending department of Westminster. It's never really changed very much. It takes its instructions from Westminster on pretty much everything as a spending department. It's refused to do anything about Brexit, and that told us a great deal, because we were told that they wouldn't stand for Brexit, but they did. And I know from my own work over the years that the Scottish governments, successive governments of all shades of political complexion, have refused to develop Scottish ports in a meaningful sense internationally. And that's a real worry. They refuse to develop ports and shipping connections. They've refused to build what I've recommended as decent ferries. They keep on building terrible ferries as if they have and the people deciding on these ferry specifications fundamentally don't have the right experience or education. So we have officials in these agencies that don't have a maritime economics or shipping education, and they don't have the right experience. But they're designing and developing and specifying terrible ferries that nobody else would operate, and shipyards anywhere find difficult to build. So we have a government basically that refuses to stand up for Scotland and has caved into everything. And they haver in weather. So I don't know about going to meet them. I've met every transport minister since Holyrood started, many before. And none have been able to change London policy and London diktat. And basically what you have in the civil servants in Scotland, and officialdom throughout Scotland really, is whatever Whitehall determines. And that's Scotland's legacy. So that's why we can't really develop. Our economy is static and our resources are extracted. And that is a colonial reality in anybody's book. So the only solution in that environment is to end it. And you can only do that through a break, not a compromise. You have to break that system, and that's through independence.
Sorry, I put out you on this microphone, so I think he's here on the wireless mic. So I'm looking at the time now from a 3-year thing. You want to wrap up, Colette, and buy off that we're wrapping up?
Okay, we're getting ready to wrap up, so if you want to have any closing statements on the board?
Yeah, well, what to say? I mean, as some of you know, I've tried to explain in my book, Dún Hodden, the reality in Scotland and what needs to be done and what should be done. We have a situation where the dominant National Party basically doesn't push independence at all and has got itself into a serious problem because of that, and the people have lost faith in it. But the policies we continue to see are not driven by Scots, or Scottish culture, or Scottish needs, or Scottish aspirations. They're imposed policies, whether it's free ports or anything else we see coming down the track. Internal markets, Brexit, everything is dictated by other people in another country. So therefore we have only one solution that we can do. And as you've said, Colette, there are ways to do it in terms of the legal aspects through human rights and through UN courts. But fundamentally, the people have to also decide. And this is where we have a slight problem in that we have no control also over our borders or as well as our resources. So we've had no control over population or aspects of that change. And that's been a fundamental change in Scotland. And people have to be aware of that. So there's a whole range of issues here, which I've tried to explain in my own theoretical framework on independence, which I hope has been able to help. But fundamentally, we need politicians to understand what independence means and why it's necessary. And my conclusion in my research, and I'm at the end of the day just a researcher, I can only base my work on scientific evidence and theory and literature and practice that I've looked at. And bear in mind that when I've looked at ports around the world, most of them are former colonies. A lot of the ports I've studied and worked at and collaborated with people there, whether it's Hong Kong, Singapore, Malta, Panama, Freeport, Bahamas, a lot of them are former colonies, and Dubai and so on, Australian ports, New Zealand ports all around the world are foreign and seaports. And one of the first things that people do on independence is develop their ports. That's what, as Ian Lawson has said many times, Estonia did when they got independence. They had to cut the umbilical cord a little bit from Moscow and recreate their historic shipping and trade connections with the rest of Europe, with Finland, with Sweden, with Germany, with their historic trading partners. And my background, for anybody who doesn't know, is as a shipping clerk in Leith. When I started there, we still had a lot of these historic connections to the Low Countries, to the Baltic, to Iberia, to Iceland, and so on, at Leith. And I was involved in quite a lot of that and could see how it had developed Scotland's culture, Scotland's languages. Our traditions, our heritage was very much Hanseatic, very much continental, and not so much Anglo. And this is the problem. We are still subject to this Anglo domination, not just culturally, but also economically. And this is what's strangling Scotland now, because Scotland would be, in my view, a very, very rich, wealthy, advanced, forward-looking international nation. But as a subordinated people, economy, territory, and unplundered territory, then the end result is what we see: zero economic growth, and people coming forward with schemes that don't necessarily fix anything. And Freeport's come into that category, I think, very well intentioned maybe by some people, but they're not the solution we need, and not at the right time, and not in the right model. So it's very dysfunctional, and it's very discouraging to hear the National Party embrace this as some kind of policy now that will benefit Scotland, because it's clearly not necessarily in that game. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. I'll just end up by saying that, again, as I said at the start, history matters. We've got a strong history of very strong people, and years and years before they even contemplated the treaty, we worked on a direct democracy forum. The people spoke, and they had to be listened to. They had the higher authority. That's been taken away from us. Well, they think it's been taken away from us. It hasn't. We need to reinstate that back. 3 days ago, we had the memorial of William Wallace. Now, I don't have to tell you who he was or what he'd done. He led, he fought for Scotland's independence and Scotland's rights. Well, we're here 3 days on from his memorial. We are going to have to be the leaders. We are going to have to be ones that fight for Scotland's independence and Scotland's rights and Scotland's economy and Scotland's future. So what I'll say to you, remember what I said, 1663, the Act of Salvo. We're here today, some of us as members of Salvo, and if those of you who aren't already members, please sign up. But I think today is the start when we actually call our first Act of Salvo and say, we want our freedom, we don't want our Freeports. Yeah.
I was just going to say this has been a great event. Enlightened me. I have no idea about Freeports. My name is Peter Duguid. I'm from Aberdeenshire. I was interested to see what this was about. It's going to affect the whole Scotland, not just where the Freeports are. One thing that Alf had mentioned in previous events, that we don't even have a shipping minister. And another thing I was going to say quickly is, when India was studying what to do with their economics post-colonialism, they were looking at countries, what to do, go capitalism, go communism, and they looked at Japan, and they said, they found out that the 19th century, when they opened up to the Western world, they developed their ports. And when they developed their ports, they opened factories. Now, Japan is a mountainous country with plenty coastline. If only Scotland was like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on. We'll be a bit of a meeting on this. Take it away and have a look at our website and build your own knowledge. The more we look at this, the more scary it becomes. The people you think not good. So I think we're possibly going to do another meeting soon. Sorry? Just a minute. No. Just 2 seconds.
No, even married, either.
Yeah, I think we're going to have another meeting at some point, so I'll hand over to you so you can see our quick goodbyes.
I just wanted to direct on the slide. No, it's not the fault, but it's round towards people. GM, Falkirk, Falkirk, and it'll be on social media. Baird will be advertising that in the next few days. Actually, once we've got as well. So put it and pass it on to your friends. And for any family in Tyfor and around Edinburgh and Falkirk Green, ask them to come. Alright, that's nice.
Can I get the number? Okay, well, thank you again, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. Okay, cheers.
Thank you.